Every single day, honestly, it feels like the news is just saturated with developments from the Middle East, doesn't it? Especially Gaza. And if you're trying to keep up, it can be really, really hard to sort of cut through all that noise and figure out what's actually happening diplomatically behind the scenes. So that's what we're trying to do today. This deep dive, we're going to look at how Europe, that's both the UK and the EU, is trying to, well, put pressure on Israel. And crucially, what difference does it actually make? What are the real world effects of all these moves? We've been digging through the latest news, looking at expert analysis, getting into the specifics of what diplomats are actually doing and saying. Our mission here is to pull out the really key bits of information, maybe uncover a few surprising things, and help you get a handle on this really nuanced, often quite divided European approach. And we'll look at the actual impact it's having. Okay, let's unpack this. It's definitely a lot going on behind the headlines. Right, let's jump straight into the UK then, because there's something pretty recent here that, well, it definitely raises eyebrows. The British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, he's just made a pretty big diplomatic statement. He's basically threatened to recognize Palestine as a state. But, and this is important, it's not just out of the blue. He made it conditional, very specific. It would only happen if Israel, and this is the quote, doesn't do enough to stop the wretched conditions in Gaza. So, it's pointed. What's the thinking there?
Yeah, that's a heavy diplomatic tool, no question. And maybe even you could say a creative way to apply pressure. It seems to be a tactic we're seeing more often. Recognizing Palestine as a state, I mean, once you play that card, you can't really take it back, can you?
Right.
And the British know perfectly well that Israel would find this step, well, profoundly unwelcome, because it gives global validation to Palestinian statehood claims, something Israel has always pushed back against, saying it has to come from direct talks.
Makes sense.
And if you zoom out a bit, the goal here, pretty clearly, is trying to force an improvement in the humanitarian situation in Gaza. It links directly back to that long-standing UN idea of a two-state solution, which, let's be honest, feels very far off right now based on the facts on the ground.
Okay, so that's the UK, a big conditional threat. But then you look across the channel to the European Union, and you have to wonder, how do they even manage a single position with, what, 27 different countries trying to agree? Well, the short answer is often they don't. The EU member states, they are really divided down to the bone on this conflict. It's incredibly sensitive, and you see their own national histories really shaping their different stances. Like take Spain, for example. They lean very strongly towards supporting the Palestinian cause. But then you've got Germany. Because of its history, its whole post-war identity and foreign policy, it's often provided what some people call unconditional support to Israel.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here, what's really striking, is that even for Germany, the situation in Gaza seems to be becoming, quote, too much.
Wow, even Germany.
Even Germany. And that's not just a minor shift in tone. It suggests a really fundamental strain, maybe something we haven't seen before, even for one of Israel's most solid traditional allies. It just shows the incredible pressure this whole Gaza situation is creating. It's forcing even nations with deep historical commitments to, well, openly rethink things. It really raises a big question, doesn't it? What is the breaking point for these really long-held alliances when humanitarian issues get this bad?
So with those kinds of deep splits, how does Europe actually do anything together? It sounds almost impossible. Well, they did try one very specific action recently. But even looking at that small step, it kind of reveals how hard that unity is to achieve. So the European Commission, that's the EU's sort of executive branch, they proposed suspending a tiny part of scientific cooperation with Israel. It's really important to stress the bigger stuff like university partnerships, all that would continue. This wasn't some massive cutoff. Okay, so why did they propose even that small step? Well, it came after an investigation. The Netherlands actually kicked it off, which found indications that Israel might be violating human rights. But the commission has now gone further, hasn't it? They're saying Israel is violating human rights, especially when you look at the famine conditions in Gaza.
All right, they've toughened their stance.
And Israel, as you'd expect, reacted strongly. Their foreign ministry basically said, look, this move just helps Hamas. It makes a ceasefire less likely, and it undermines getting the hostages back.
Yeah, and this whole episode really puts a spotlight on how the EU actually makes decisions about sanctions. It shows those exact divisions we were just talking about.
How so?
Well, for the really serious sanctions, the ones that would properly sting, you generally need unanimity. All 27 countries have to agree. That's why, for instance, there's been a proposal kicking around for 6 months now to sanction violent settlers in the West Bank. It's still blocked. Just one country, Hungary, is holding it up.
Right. Unanimity is a high bar.
It is.
Yeah.
But for other things like stopping subsidy programs or certain trade benefits, they can use something called qualified majority. That
Yeah.
give it like a weighted vote. You need 15 out of the 27 countries to say yes, and those 15 countries have to represent at least 65% of the EU's total population.
Okay. A bit more achievable, maybe.
Supposedly. And the Commission put forward this quite small scientific cooperation measure using that qualified majority rule.
Right.
They clearly thought, okay, this one should get enough support.
It did it.
That's the kicker. Even with that lower bar, which is designed specifically to get around needing everyone to agree, there's still not enough support for it to actually pass.
Wow.
It just tells you how deep those fractures go when it comes to Gaza. They can't even agree on this relatively minor step.
So, okay, this leads us right to the crunch question, really, for you listening. Does any of this European pressure actually matter much to Israel? We see these diplomatic signals, these attempted actions, but does Israel feel it? Does it change their calculations? I mean, the general understanding is that Israel mostly looks towards the United States, right, for guidance, for support. The U.S. provides huge amounts of military aid, diplomatic cover, that crucial veto at the UN Security Council. It's often described as, well, unconditional support.
Exactly. And we connect this to the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
Look, Israel isn't going to lose sleep over what Europe thinks or does, for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Washington is their main focus, always has been. However, they would be, quote, very shocked if Germany, specifically Germany, were to make a major U-turn.
Back to Germany.
Yes, because Germany's support isn't just political, it's deeply symbolic. It's rooted in that unique history.
Mm-hmm.
A big shift from Berlin would feel like a much more profound kind of international isolation for Israel than, say, criticism from Spain or Ireland.
I see. But are there any concrete effects from Europe's actions then? Or is it all just noise?
No, it's not entirely without effect. There are tangible things, even if they're limited. Remember that human rights investigation we mentioned?
Yeah.
Well, after that, the EU's foreign affairs chief did engage directly with Israel. And that apparently led to some agreements to allow more aid into Gaza.
Okay, so some practical impact on the ground.
Some. Brussels says they see signals of improvement, but they quickly add the situation is still very serious, and they are not satisfied. There's also this other point. The EU actually wants to send its own people into Gaza to monitor the situation, partly because some EU countries, and actually Israel too sometimes, are critical of the figures the UN provides on aid and conditions. They want their own eyes on the ground.
Makes sense.
But so far, Israel hasn't given permission for that direct EU presence.
Right. So putting it all together, maybe Europe's influence doesn't, keep Israeli leaders up at night.
Probably not.
But these actions, even if they feel a bit fragmented or slow, they do seem to have some real-world consequence, especially around humanitarian access. It's a slow process, but not totally irrelevant. So wrapping this up, what does all this mean for you? We've sort of dug into this complex picture, haven't we? This divided European diplomatic pressure campaign. You've got the UK with its high-stakes conditional threats, and then the EU struggling with its internal divisions, trying these fragmented actions.
Yeah, and I think the takeaway is, while the U.S. is clearly the main player Israel listens to, Europe's efforts, even though they're often messy and divided, they still add to the overall international environment. And they can, sometimes, nudge things forward in small but important ways, like we saw with the aid access.
Okay, so here's a final thought, perhaps, for you to consider.
What does this deep division within Europe, especially on something as fundamental as human rights in a conflict like this, what does it really signal about the future of a unified European foreign policy?
Yeah.
And, maybe more pointedly, how much impact can these diplomatic signals, even from big blocs like the EU, truly have when the main country involved is mostly looking somewhere else, to Washington, for its cues?